My name is Michael Anderson and I'm the family disappointment. The son who never quite made it. The youngest of 4 children who, according to my father, has been financially dependent his entire adult life. What my father doesn't know is that for the past 5 years, I've been the anonymous investor keeping his failing manufacturing plant operational. That Christmas morning, surrounded by twinkling lights and the smell of pine, he finally learned exactly how dependent his youngest son really is. Let me start at the beginning. I'm the youngest by 7 years. My sister Patricia is a surgeon. Brother Marcus runs a hedge fund. Sister Elena married into old money and sits on 3 nonprofit boards. All high achievers. All making our father proud. Then there's me. The one who dropped out of business school. The one who wasted his potential becoming a software developer. The one who lives in a modest apartment, drives a used Toyota, and apparently hasn't grown up yet. I'm 31 years old and my father still introduces me as the one we're still waiting on. What he doesn't know, what none of them know, is that I'm worth $267 million. It started when I was 23. I dropped out of Wharton after 2 years because I was already making $180,000 a year as a freelance developer. I'd built a reputation solving complex back-end problems for startups. While my classmates studied case studies, I was debugging systems for companies that would become unicorns. One of those companies offered me equity instead of full cash payment. We're pre-funding, the founder had explained. But I can give you 0.3% of the company plus $40,000 cash for the work. I'd said yes. 18 months later, that company sold to Google for $340 million. My 0.3% stake was worth $1.02 million after taxes. My family knew I'd made some money on a startup. They assumed I'd spent it. Michael probably bought video games. Marcus had joked at Thanksgiving that year. Very on brand. I'd smiled and said nothing. Instead, I'd taken that money and invested it the way I understood. In early-stage tech companies where I could actually assess the technical architecture. Companies where I could evaluate whether the code was solid, whether the systems would scale, whether the founding team actually understood what they were building. I became an angel investor. Not publicly. Not with fanfare. Just quietly writing checks between $50,000 and $200,000 to founders who impressed me. Over 8 years, I invested in 43 companies. 17 failed completely. 12 broke even or returned modest profits. 9 did well. 5 became massive successes. My portfolio grew exponentially. By 28, I was worth $89 million. By 30, $183 million. At 31, $267 million and growing. And through it all, my family watched me live in my $1,900 per month apartment, drive my paid-off Toyota, and work my little coding jobs, and assumed I was barely getting by. They never asked about my work. They never asked about my investments. They just assumed I was the family failure. Meanwhile, my father ran Anderson Manufacturing. The company his father started in 1974, building industrial components for construction and automotive industries. Dad took over in 1998 and ran it successfully for years. But the industry changed. Automation, overseas competition, shifting supply chains. By 2019, Anderson Manufacturing was struggling. Revenue declining, margins shrinking, debt mounting. Dad's pride wouldn't let him admit it publicly. At family gatherings, he'd talk about market challenges and strategic repositioning. But I could read between the lines. I was 26 when I hired a private consultant to audit Anderson Manufacturing's financials. The report was damning. The company needed $8 to $10 million in capital for equipment modernization or it would be insolvent within 3 years. Dad was approaching banks. Being rejected. Interest rates were unfavorable for a struggling manufacturer with declining revenues. So I did something he would never know about. Through a shell corporation, Cascade Investment Partners LC, I offered Anderson Manufacturing $8.9 million in investment capital. The terms were structured as a convertible note, 7% annual interest, 5-year term with the option to convert to equity if the company went public or sold. Dad's CFO had been thrilled. Finally, a smart investor who sees the potential, he told my father. Dad never asked who was behind Cascade Investment Partners. He was too relieved to have the capital. For 5 years I'd watched my father modernize his plant with my money. New CNC machines, automated assembly lines, updated quality control systems. The company stabilized. Revenues slowly recovered. Jobs were saved. And at every family gathering, Dad lectured me about financial responsibility. Michael, you're 31, he'd said at Easter. When are you going to take life seriously? When are you going to build something real? I'm building software, I'd replied calmly. Software. He'd actually laughed. Code that disappears when the server crashes. I'm talking about real assets, equipment, property, things that matter, things that last. Different people value different things, I'd said. Different people have different capabilities, he'd corrected. Some people are builders. Some people are, well, not everyone can handle real responsibility. At my 30th birthday dinner, he'd actually stood up to give a toast. To Michael, he'd said, who we love despite his unconventional choices. Maybe this year will be the year he finally grows up, finds a real career, stops depending on others, becomes financially independent. Patricia had shifted uncomfortably. Marcus had smirked. Elena had looked sympathetic. I'd raised my glass. Here's hoping. Everyone had laughed. But the worst was Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Dad had gathered the whole family, 23 people, for what he called an important announcement. I want to talk about the future of Anderson Manufacturing, he'd begun. Specifically, succession planning. He'd looked at Patricia. You're brilliant, but medicine is your calling. To Marcus, you've built your own success in finance. To Elena, you've found your purpose in philanthropy. Then to me, Michael. Well, Michael isn't ready for this kind of responsibility. May never be. Some people just don't have the constitution for business ownership. 23 people had witnessed him write me off as incompetent. I'd said nothing. Just sat there while my father publicly declared I was incapable of handling responsibility. What he didn't know was that I'd been keeping his company alive for 3 years at that point. That my investment had saved 47 jobs. That his strategic repositioning was only possible because of my capital. The Christmas gathering was at my parents' house in Connecticut. The whole family there. Patricia and her husband, Marcus and his wife, Elena and her family. 14 people total. Dad was in rare form. The plant had just completed its best quarter in 5 years. He'd been holding court all morning, talking about his business acumen, his strategic vision, his ability to navigate challenges. This is what leadership looks like, he'd announced over breakfast. Making hard decisions. Taking calculated risks. Building something lasting. We'd moved to the living room for gift exchange. The tree was spectacular, 12 feet tall, professionally decorated. Gifts piled underneath. Dad had given Patricia a first-edition medical text she'd been searching for. Marcus received vintage cufflinks from the 1920s. Elena got a donation in her name to her favorite charity. He'd handed me an envelope. For Michael. Something practical. Inside was a gift certificate for a career coaching service. Real career paths for tech workers. Find your future. The room had gone quiet. I thought it might help, Dad had said. You're good with computers, Michael, but at some point you need to think about actual career progression. Building towards something. Not just freelancing forever. I appreciate the thought, I'd said evenly. Do you? He'd settled into his chair. But son, I worry about you. You're 31 years old. No property. No real career trajectory. No retirement planning as far as I can tell. You're living the same life you lived at 23. That's not growth. That's stagnation. Marcus had nodded. Dad has a point, Mike. Most people our age are building equity. Families. Real wealth. I'm comfortable, I'd replied. Comfortable is just another word for complacent, Dad had said. Comfortable is what people say when they're afraid to admit they're falling behind. You're financially dependent, Michael. On your freelance income, on the kindness of clients, on luck. Always have been, always will be. Patricia had tried to redirect. Dad, maybe this isn't. No, he needs to hear this, Dad had interrupted. I've been too soft. Too understanding. But the truth is, Michael, you're 31 and you haven't achieved anything permanent. Nothing real. Nothing that matters. Elena had looked uncomfortable. Everyone's path is different. And some paths lead nowhere, Dad had finished. I built a company. Created jobs. Made an impact. What have you built, Michael? A resume? A LinkedIn profile? Code that gets deleted when the next developer comes along. The entire room was watching me. My siblings, their spouses, my mother sitting silently by the fireplace. You're financially dependent, Dad had continued. You always have been. On clients for your income. On landlords for housing. On luck for your next contract. That's not independence. That's barely getting by while pretending it's a choice. I pulled out my phone. Are you checking your email? Dad had looked disgusted. This is Christmas morning and you can't even put your phone away during a family conversation. Just one message, I'd said calmly. To my wealth manager. Your wealth manager? Marcus had laughed. Mike, you don't have a wealth manager. I'd typed quickly. Gregory, execute immediate divestment from Anderson Manufacturing per our standing contingency. All capital, all accounts. Request conversion to cash rather than equity. Standard exit protocols. Ma. Said. There, I'd said. Portfolio adjustment made. Dad had frowned. Portfolio? Michael, what are you talking about? The $8.9 million investment in Anderson Manufacturing, I'd replied calmly. I'm withdrawing it. The room went dead silent. You don't have $8.9 million, Dad had said slowly. You're a freelance coder. You live in a rented apartment. You drive a 12-year-old Toyota. 11 years, I'd corrected. And yes, I do have $8.9 million. Well, I have considerably more than that, but that's the amount currently invested in your company. Dad's phone had started ringing. He'd stared at it. His CFO's name on the screen. Looked at me. Looked at the phone. You should answer that, I'd suggested. His hand had trembled as he'd accepted the call. Robert? It's Christmas morning, this had better be. His face had changed. What do you mean, divestment notice? From who? I'd watched him listen. Watched understanding dawn slowly. Cascade Investment Partners, he'd said. No. That's impossible. They've been our primary capital source for 5 years. They can't just. He'd looked at me. What do you mean, immediate withdrawal? The room was absolutely silent. Robert, that's $8.9 million, Dad had said, voice rising. If that capital is withdrawn, we'll have to refinance the equipment purchases. The terms will be, he'd listened. Find out who authorized this. Find out right now. Call them. Offer better terms. We need that capital. He'd ended the call. The entire family was staring. Michael, he'd said slowly. Are you telling me you're Cascade Investment Partners? I am Cascade Investment Partners, I'd confirmed. It's one of several investment entities I manage. I structured it specifically to provide capital to Anderson Manufacturing 5 years ago when you were getting rejected by banks. Mom had gripped the arm of her chair. Michael has $8.9 million? Had, I'd corrected. I have considerably more than that. But yes, $8.9 million was what your company needed 5 years ago to avoid insolvency, so that's what I provided. Patricia had stood up. Wait, Michael, you've been funding Dad's company? For 5 years. Yes. The modernization, the new equipment, the recovery. Marcus had looked stunned. That was your money? 7% annual interest, 5-year convertible note, I'd explained. Completely legal, fair market terms. I've collected about $3.1 million in interest payments over 5 years. Reasonable return. Dad had sunk into his chair. This is impossible. You're a freelance developer. You barely. I'm an angel investor, I'd interrupted. Have been for 8 years. I started with equity from an early startup that exited successfully. I've since invested in 43 companies. My current portfolio is worth $267 million. Someone had actually gasped. Elena, I think. That's impossible, Marcus had repeated. Mike, you live in a 1-bedroom apartment. You drive a Toyota from 2013. You work freelance coding jobs. I live modestly because I prefer simplicity, I'd said calmly. The Toyota is paid off and reliable. And I don't work freelance coding jobs. I evaluate technical architecture for early-stage companies and invest accordingly. I just happen to enjoy actual coding, so I take on occasional projects. $267 million? Patricia had whispered. As of yesterday's valuation, yes. 3 of my portfolio companies are in late-stage funding rounds. That number will likely increase significantly over the next 18 months. Dad had been shaking his head. Why didn't you tell us? Why live like you're struggling? I'm not struggling. I'm living within my values. And I tried to tell you, Dad. For years I tried to talk about my work. About the companies I was evaluating. About investment strategy. You weren't interested. You were too busy telling me I was financially dependent. But you let me believe. I let you reveal who you are, I'd corrected. Every time you dismissed my work. Every time you called me dependent. Every time you publicly questioned my competence. I let you show me exactly how much you respected me. Mom had tears in her eyes. Michael, we didn't know. You didn't ask, I'd said. That's different. Not once in 8 years did any of you ask if there might be more to my story. You saw modest living and assumed failure. You saw simplicity and assumed incompetence. Dad was just trying to help, Elena had said weakly. By publicly humiliating me? I'd looked at my father. By giving me a career coaching gift certificate on Christmas morning? By telling 14 family members that I'm financially dependent and always will be. The room had been silent. For 5 years I've been the reason Anderson Manufacturing still exists, I'd continued. The equipment Dad brags about. My money. The modernization he takes credit for. My capital. The jobs he saved. I funded that. And through it all he's lectured me about financial responsibility. Dad's phone had rung again. Then his CFO had called Mom's phone. Then Dad's had rung a 3rd time. If you withdraw that money, Dad had said desperately, the company will have to refinance. At current rates with our revenue profile. Michael, it could cost us an additional $2.3 million over the term. That's profit we can't afford to lose. Then I guess you'll have to make some hard choices, I'd said. You know, leadership decisions. Strategic repositioning. The kind of business acumen you've been lecturing me about. Michael, please. We're family. You can't just what? I'd interrupted. Can't withdraw my own investment? Can't manage my own portfolio? Can't make strategic decisions about my capital allocation. You're doing this to punish me, Dad had said. I'm doing this because I'm tired of funding your success while you publicize my supposed failures, I'd replied. I'm tired of being called dependent while I literally keep your company solvent. I'm tired of being dismissed. Marcus had stepped forward. Mike, come on. This is extreme. Dad was just what? I'd looked at my brother. Just publicly humiliating me? Just giving me a gift certificate that implied I was unemployable? Just telling everyone I'd never amount to anything? Marcus had gone quiet. The divestment is filed, I'd said firmly. It's legal, it's immediate, and it's happening. Dad has 30 days to secure replacement financing per the terms of our agreement. I suggest he start making calls. I'd picked up my coat. Where are you going? Mom had asked. It's Christmas morning. We haven't even had dinner. I'm going home, I'd said. To my rented apartment. In my dependent Toyota. To live my financially unsuccessful life. Merry Christmas. I'd walked out of that house and driven back to Manhattan. Back to my apartment. The one I chose to rent because building maintenance wasn't how I wanted to spend my time. The next 30 days were chaos. Gregory, my wealth manager, called with updates. Anderson Manufacturing is scrambling. They've approached 4 banks. Best terms they're getting quoted are 11% with significant collateral requirements. Expensive, I'd noted. Your father called me directly, Gregory had added. 11 times. I referred him to the contract terms per your instructions. Good. He also threatened legal action. I pointed out that everything was executed precisely as written. He has no legal ground. Even better. Dad had called me 42 times in the first week. I'd answered on the 43rd. Michael, please. We can't secure favorable terms. The banks see a company that just lost its primary investor. They're treating us as high risk. Then offer better collateral, I'd suggested. We've offered everything. The plant, the equipment, accounts receivable. Michael, do you understand what you're doing? This company is my life's work. My father's legacy. You're destroying it. I'm withdrawing my investment, I'd corrected. You're the one who built a business model dependent on an investor you openly mocked. I'm just the investor who got tired of being mocked. I didn't know it was you. Would it have mattered? I'd interrupted. If you'd known I was your investor, would you have treated me with respect? Or would you have just been afraid to insult me? There's a difference, Dad. Silence. The answer is you would have been afraid, I'd said. You wouldn't have actually respected me. You just wouldn't have been able to be openly dismissive. That's not respect. That's fear-based politeness. Michael, I'm sorry. For everything I said. For how I treated you. I was wrong. You were wrong for years, I'd said. Every Christmas. Every Thanksgiving. Every family gathering. You were wrong over and over again. And the only reason you're apologizing now is because it's costing you money. That's not true. 30 days, Dad. Same terms as the contract you signed. Find alternative financing or don't. But I'm not your backup plan anymore. I'd hung up. Patricia had tried a different approach. Lunch in Midtown, her treat. This is nuclear, Mike, she'd said carefully. You had to know what withdrawing would do to Dad's company. I did. And you're okay with that? He called me financially dependent on Christmas morning, I'd replied. In front of 14 family members. After giving me a gift certificate that implied I was unemployable. While I'd been keeping his company afloat for 5 years. Am I okay with withdrawing my investment? Yes, Patricia. I am. He's our father. Which makes it worse, not better, I'd interrupted. He should have been proud of me. Instead, he used me as an example of failure at every family gathering. For years. She'd been quiet for a moment. Why didn't you tell us about your success? I tried, I'd said. I tried to talk about the companies I was evaluating. About investment strategy. About the work I was doing. Nobody was interested. You all preferred the narrative that I was the family disappointment. That's not fair. Isn't it? I'd looked at her. Be honest, Patricia. When was the last time you asked me about my work? Actually asked, not just made polite conversation. She'd looked away. Never, I'd answered for her. Because you all assumed there was nothing interesting to ask about. You saw modest living and assumed it meant struggling. You saw simplicity and assumed it meant failure. Mike, we didn't mean. Yes, you did, I'd said gently. You all meant it. Marcus called me a perpetual teenager. Elena pitted my phase. You've been sympathetically suggesting I find direction for years. You all meant every word. So this is revenge? This is boundaries, I'd corrected. I'm not destroying Dad's company. I'm withdrawing my investment because I'm tired of being disrespected while providing critical support. There's a difference. Week 3, Dad found a regional bank willing to provide $7.2 million at 10.5% interest. Still needed $1.7 million. Week 4, he took a second mortgage on the family house. Day 29, he secured the final piece through a private lender at 14% interest. He'd done it. Barely. At significantly higher costs. With strained cash flow. But he'd done it. Gregory called on day 30. The transfer is complete. Anderson Manufacturing confirmed they've secured replacement financing. Your $8.9 million is back in your primary account. Company viability? They'll survive. But the higher interest rates will pressure margins for years. Your father's profitability projections are now half of what they were. So the company he spent 5 years bragging about is now just mediocre. Essentially. 4 months after the withdrawal, Dad requested a meeting. Just the two of us. A diner in Connecticut, neutral territory. He looked smaller somehow. Tired. The stress had aged him. Thank you for seeing me, he'd said quietly. I'd nodded. We secured the financing, he'd continued. Company's stable. We'll make it through. But the margins are tight now. Very tight. The expansion plans I had, they're not possible anymore. Not with the debt service. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? He'd searched my face. Because you had to know what withdrawing would do. I did, I'd confirmed. Just like you had to know what years of dismissal would do to our relationship. He'd looked down at his coffee. I was an ass. Yes. For years. Yes. I told myself I was trying to motivate you, he'd admitted. That tough love would push you to achieve more. But the truth? I was threatened. You dropped out of business school and I felt like it was a rejection of everything I valued. And when you seemed to be fine anyway, living simply and doing work I didn't understand, it made me feel irrelevant. I hadn't expected that honesty. So you convinced yourself I was failing, I'd said. Yes. He'd met my eyes. I needed you to be failing so my path, the traditional path, still mattered. When you lived modestly, it confirmed what I wanted to believe. That my way was the right way and you were just lost. I was never lost, Dad. I was just on a different map. I know that now. He paused. Can I ask why you invested in my company? If I was so awful to you, why help at all? I'd considered. Because under different circumstances we could have been partners. You built something real, Dad. You saved jobs, served customers, continued Grandpa's legacy. That deserves respect. I just wanted that respect to go both ways. Instead I took your money and mocked you with it. Essentially, yes. He'd been quiet for a long time. Can we fix this? Us. Maybe, I'd said. But Dad, it starts with actually seeing me. Not the version of me you assumed existed, but who I actually am. What I've actually built. Not because I'm suddenly worth $267 million, but because I'm your son and I deserve that respect regardless. I understand. Do you? Because for years, you introduced me as the one we're still waiting on. Like I was a disappointment in progress. That doesn't just hurt, Dad. It defines how everyone else sees me. You taught the whole family to dismiss me. He'd wiped his eyes. I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Not because you have money now. Not because you had the power to hurt my company. But because I failed you as a father. I was supposed to see you. To support you. To be proud of you. And instead I made you feel worthless. It was the apology I'd needed for years. Thank you, I'd said quietly. That means something. Is it enough? It's a start. Today, nearly 2 years after that Christmas morning, my life looks mostly the same. Same apartment. Same Toyota. Same quiet lifestyle. My portfolio has grown to $342 million. 4 of my investments exited successfully. I've backed 9 new companies, all with female founders or founders of color. People who remind me what it's like to be underestimated. Dad's company survived, but he's humbler now. Smaller dreams. Tighter margins. He works longer hours for less profit. We have lunch monthly. He asks about my investments. Actually listens. Asks intelligent questions. Sometimes he shares challenges from the plant and I offer perspective. Not as a lecture. As a conversation. Last month he said something that surprised me. You know what I've realized? He'd begun. I spent 30 years building that company. Creating jobs. Serving customers. And I was proud of that. But you built a $342 million portfolio by recognizing talent before anyone else did. By taking risks on people everyone else overlooked. That's actually more impressive than anything I've done. Different skills, Dad. Both matter. Maybe. But I should have seen that sooner. Should have been proud of you instead of threatened by you. Small steps. But they're steps. My siblings have adjusted. Marcus refers investors to me now. Patricia asks for advice on her retirement portfolio. Elena connected me with a nonprofit she works with that needed strategic planning. They still don't quite understand my lifestyle. You could afford a penthouse, Marcus said last month. I could, I'd agreed. But then I'd spend weekends thinking about maintenance and property taxes instead of code. This is better. He'd shaken his head, smiling. You're weird, Mike. I'm consistent, I'd corrected. That Christmas morning, watching my father's face change as he realized his financially dependent son was actually the investor keeping his company alive, I felt something shift. Not triumph. Not revenge. Relief. I'd spent 8 years trying to prove I wasn't who they assumed I was. Trying to earn respect I should have had automatically. Trying to be seen. Withdrawing that $8.9 million wasn't destruction. It was a statement. I don't need your validation anymore. I don't need to fund your success while you broadcast my supposed failures. I don't need to make myself smaller so you can feel bigger. I'm Michael Anderson. I manage a $342 million investment portfolio. I've backed 43 companies and helped build things that matter. I've created returns that would make any investor proud. And I did it while my family called me dependent. The irony isn't lost on me. They saw renting. I saw freedom from property management. They saw an old Toyota. I saw paid-off reliability. They saw freelance work. I saw technical evaluation that informed 8-figure investment decisions. They saw dependence. I saw independence they couldn't comprehend. My father learned an expensive lesson. Assumptions cost more than interest rates. That Christmas, I didn't destroy his company. I simply stopped subsidizing his narrative about my incompetence. The consequences he feared? He created those himself. By choosing dismissal over curiosity. By choosing assumptions over asking. By choosing superiority over seeing his son clearly. I just withdrew my capital and let the market teach the lesson I'd spent 8 years trying to explain. Some people are financially dependent. And some people are the dependable investors everyone else relies on. The difference is just perception.